Okay, this is the video lecture on sensation and perception for my Introduction to Psychology class. Now, I've taught this, or I've given this lecture in bits and pieces in all of my classes. So for some of you, you're going to be seeing some of the things that you may have seen in class. So again, some of this will be new, and some of this will be maybe a little bit of review. But you're going to want to have this in your notes regardless for the exam that's coming up. So if you remember, I know that we covered the ideas of sensation and perception. We talked about how sensation is taking in the raw information through your senses, and I gave plenty of examples in class. We talked about how you see the same kinds of things, the same images. We see the rocks, we see the water, we see the vegetation. We sense the same thing with our eyes. We see flowers, and we see a rock formation. We hear the same kinds of things. In class, we listen to different sounds and different pieces of music. We did an exercise also in class where we actually, in most of my classes I should say, where I actually passed around some candy and we tasted things. So we all sense pretty much the same thing, whether it's the same piece of candy, the same scenery. We may feel the same thing on our skin or in our hands. We may smell the same thing with our nose. However, perception is how we select, organize, and interpret this information that we take in through our senses. So we may sense the same thing, for example, the same piece of candy, but we may perceive it differently. Some people may like a Hershey bar, and others may not. And we spent a lot of time talking about the difference again between sensation and perception. So you should have this in your notes, but there you go. And again, we did the candy exercise in most of my classes. If you're one of the classes watching this who hasn't had the candy exercise, we're coming to that. You'll get some, I promise. So, okay. Now, I know that we've also talked about perception and attention. We talked about this in class. We talked about the 3 different types of attention. Attention is the ability to notice some things but to ignore others. We talked about selective attention being like tunnel vision, paying attention to one thing and one thing only, while pretty much ignoring the rest. The examples that I used in class were like, if you find out you have a test or a quiz, your next class period, as soon as your classmate asks you the question, hey, did you study for the quiz or the test? And you're like, what test, what quiz? You probably will cram after you cry and focus on nothing else but that exam that's coming up in 20 minutes. Now, divisible attention, the next type if you remember, is like multitasking. It's the ability to pay attention to more than one thing at the same time. For a lot of you right now who are probably taking notes on this video, you might have your television on, you might be listening to music, you might be texting, you might be doing 4 or 5 different things at the same time. That's divisible attention. And then shiftable attention simply refers to your ability to move or shift from one thing to the next. So the example I used in class was I'm paying attention to what's cooking on the stove, then I hear a loud noise in my daughter's bedroom, so I have to go there and make sure she's okay. Then I go back to the stove. Then I hear someone knocking at the door, so I leave the stove and go attend to the door. You get the idea. We also talked about how mood, culture, and context impact perception. I showed several videos about culture. We talked about how different cultural events from different parts of the world may seem very strange to us. We've looked at videos in some of my classes, including the blackening of the bride from Scotland, where the bride-to-be is literally doused with dirt and eggs and milk and flour. If you recall that video, that looks strange to us, but within the context of their culture, it may be very normal. We talked about how mood impacts perception. Sometimes if you're in a good mood, you may like certain kinds of music. If you're in a bad mood, you may not like that same musical selection that you liked a week ago, for example. A lot of people have different wardrobe. They make different wardrobe choices based on their mood. Context. The idea that your friend can flip you off and you'll laugh about it. It's not a big deal. But if a complete stranger does it in a different context, it's different. We don't like that very well, and we did talk about that. Now, for some of my classes, this is going to represent a breaking off point. In some classes, we talked about thresholds, and others not. Now, your book talks about thresholds. It's not super exciting stuff, but it's important to understand. in this unit. Now a threshold, and these are definitions you're going to want to have in your notes for sure. A threshold refers to the smallest or the minimal amount of energy needed to tell that something is happening or changing. Okay? So the minimal amount of energy needed to tell that something is happening or changing. Now I want to start talking to you about two types of thresholds: detection threshold and discrimination thresholds. Now a detection, when you think of detection, you think about the ability to know something is there. If you detect it, you can tell it's there. It's the smallest amount of energy required for a stimulus to be reported approximately 50% of the time. Now, a discrimination threshold, on the other hand, is the smallest amount of change required to tell a difference between two stimuli. So, detection, can you tell it's there? Discrimination, trying to tell the difference between two things. So, and I'm going to elaborate on that. We're going to go ahead and call that the end of part 1 of sensation and perception. Thank you.